Today is a really simple art project. We're going to be basically exploring a silly still life to have a bit of fun and really to get to know our watercolours a little bit better. So all you need is a pen. I'm using a Sharpie, something a bit different today, so just one of those permanent markers, your normal watercolours, because this is all about getting to know your watercolours, and a big brush, and I suppose loads of water. And let's go. So my still life is going to be a couple of apples, and I'm going to do them very simply. Of course they have to be simple, we're using a Sharpie. So a big swirl, and then we can imagine another one here, slightly overlapping it. And then we can just find some of the darks and some of the shadows that are coming down. And maybe, why don't we pop in an extra apple just in the distance and give it a little leaf as well. And that's all, basically all we need. Maybe we can do a little bit of kind of textural marks with our Sharpie. Maybe we can come and make a uber bold line as well. Why not? There we go. So when we're doing pen and watercolour, the thing to remember is the pen provides a lot of that contrast. It's a cheat, really. Normally, if we're using watercolours, we have to spend many hours slowly building up layer after layer after layer. But with a pen, especially something nice and bold like this, a few simple marks, and we already have a fascinating contrasting scene on the page. So any pen will do. It just needs to be permanent. So this is a permanent marker. You could use a Posca pen, which is acrylic ink. You could use anything and just focus on a really simple set of objects. And apples are wonderful for this because of their sort of, well, the fun they have in their shapes and the way they overlap. Now, I've got a really big brush. This is a 1-inch flat brush. And what I'm going to be doing is picking up and moving my my page. You can see my cunningly hidden ink stain there, but let's forget about that for a moment. So this allows me to move the water. I can go all the way up. That's going to be a bit extreme, but I can hold it largely at about a 10-degree angle, just a tiny bit off the page. And the key to watercolours is very much in the name. It's all about the water. So I'm going to start by popping some water on the page. When we are getting to know our watercolours, it's great to experiment and try to practice things which are going to let us get those fluid, lovely colours. So rather than trying to paint by numbers, today we are not painting by numbers. We're going to do something a little bit abstract and then provide a tiny bit of shape at the end. So I've got this water coming off the edge of the page, and maybe you can see it in the face camera a bit better. There's just a slight glimmer. You can kind of see the light catching it like that. There's a slight glimmer, but there isn't a puddle. So the page has got surface water, not an absolute lake of water. So that's number one, is having a slightly wet page. But number two is not picking up your neat colours. So if I come in with my brush, even though it's big and wet, and I pick up this, let's say this quinacridone, I put it straight on the page, it's very intense and it's not going to move very far. That's actually not too bad. But if I keep doing that, the watercolours in the pan will get wetter and wetter, and this will get harder and harder to not just feel clay and boggy. So instead, we mix in the pan. So I could get, actually let's just do the same colour. We could get some of that quinacridone sienna, mix it in the pan, and then pick it up with a wet brush. And look at how that moves in the pan. And now, look at the difference. Really crystal clear colour. Now this has some interesting texture in it, but it doesn't have that clarity, that sort of beautiful light that we want from our first layer of watercolour. And what I'm going to do now is just pick colours which are abstract, and I'm just going to use colours I haven't used much recently. So let's have a look. Let's go with a little bit of green. So I haven't used this green much in recent times. So here's a bit of Green Apatite Genuine. And that will create some interesting changes. Again, look, mixing it in the palette and then on the page, and we get a crystal clear wash of colour. And no, it doesn't immediately jump off the page. But what we don't want to do is come in like so and pop a really thick, horrible bit of paint on straight away, because then as we try and build things up, it's too much. Alas, with our fun project today, we can work out how to rescue this though. So we come in with a brush, nice and wet. If we come in before it's dry, we can move that around, lift a bit of it up, but you can still see it's not as clear. It's never going to be as clear if we come in with that neat pigment. It doesn't mean there isn't a time when we want that neat pigment, but it's certainly not at the beginning of your painting. Allow your painting a bit of room to breathe. Now I'm going to just pop in, this is some magenta, which I never seem to use. And knowing our colours is so important. So having a play with colours you often don't use can be really useful in learning more about them. And maybe learning you don't like them. Maybe learning how they move in colour and how easily they lift up, for example. Here, let's pick a little bit more of magenta. What I want to do is see how that mixes. So I'm going to pop a bit of ultramarine blue in there. And then that's gone too blue. So now I know that the blue is a lot more powerful, useful learning point. Now, gradually we can pop some more magenta and we get this nice purple, nice and crystal clear. And there's our shadows. And look at that. And because everything's still wet, we can let those shadows sort of blend as well. So we can find, for example, here we got that shadow, we got this shadow here, and we're going to have a bit of shadow in there. Maybe now is a time where we can pick up some neat pigment and just drop it in. And now start experimenting with that idea. And even when I say neat pigment, I'm still just testing in my pan here, still just doing little tests. Quite a lot going on now. And what you'll notice is even when we pop in this pigment, let's do another really bold bit of pigment, even when we pop that in, it softens out. That's because it's a wet page. We made it wet first on purpose. We're using a big brush. So what we need to do at this stage is not rush ahead. We need to let things just dry off, and then we can provide more layers and more depth. Now I said the contrast already comes from the ink, so we'll just do one more layer, I think. And before we get there, we can explore our splashes. Now this is always a matter of consternation for people. It's quite hard to learn to do it, it seems. But when you can do it, you will have found your way and it's very easy. So I like just tapping with my finger. The easiest way to get started is just to tap on something or tap something on your brush. Now you can see that creates a little fine mist. I find it easier to control by tapping my finger. I've just done it a lot that way. Anyway, I said we would leave it, so I should stop fiddling. And let's leave it. So when you see me next in a few seconds, by the power of magic, this will be dry. Now, we are halfway through drying, but this is a really useful learning point. Can you see here? And if I move the page, you'll see, hopefully, there's a pool of water. You can see this trail here that moves. Do this, and you can see it moving. You can just see that intensity of pigment, that's trail moving. Now, because I had a little bit too much water on my page, depending on your opinion, or depending on how much you like this effect, you'll see we have this edge. So despite everything being soft, because this pool of water is drying out, this little lake, we end up with this edge in our colour. I quite like the effect, but only if it's not too much. If this is everywhere, or if it's in a sky, it can be a bit off-putting. It is difficult to fix. What we can do, if we notice it, we can sort of soften it a little bit, but often we end up making things worse. So you might be able to see that by trying to soften it there, I just kind of accentuate the edge. This is already dried a bit, so if I pull out here again, all I'm doing is accentuating that edge. I'm pulling out some more of the pigment. The dry edge is still there. So just an interesting learning point, I think. If you have a puddle of water, if you don't like this effect, it's best to remove that puddle with a brush before you start drying. Anyway, despite that little puddle, it's dry enough for me to get going on my next layer. And here we want to think about gently layering. So again, if I pick out neat pigment and I pop it down, it's claggy, it's thick. There is a place for that, but it isn't yet, and it should be done, in my opinion, with caution. Instead, we mix in the palette, slightly thicker this time, but still nowhere near toothpaste, still lovely and light colours. And now we can layer. Now, the magic of watercolours is when they are dry, they are waterproof. You can scrub them up, but they won't spread. So we can create these layers, and look at the increased intensity just from simply popping a light layer on top. That's why we don't need to go really thick with our colours. What I like doing, just coming around, varying that shadow a little bit. It's a bit more blue here, which can then come into a couple of the apples. And you'll notice I'm now painting wet on dry. The paints are wet, the page is dry for the most part. The wet on wet is still happening here, where I didn't fully let that lake dry out. And that lets us just control things a little bit more now, or introduce a little bit of lack of control if we want to. So I might come in with some sort of bright colours in one of the washes already done. I might do the same down here. Maybe if we just get some nice greens into there again, this is the same green again. I come in and I create a sort of greeny, orangey, again, feels a little bit like a shadow, doesn't it? And then we can even do things like come in with a wet brush and just add a bit of water. Now you'll also notice another reason my colours might start getting a bit cloudy is my paint's a bit cloudy. My water's a bit cloudy, sorry. So I need to be sensible about recognising that. And if it's really important that I get crystal clear colours, I would need to change my water at this point. However, for a simple, fun art project where we just explore our colours a bit, it's fine by me. And I'm actually going to call that layer done. Now, we have two options here. One is let things dry completely and leave it be. Actually, there's three options. The next is let things dry and come in and paint a little bit thicker. So if we were doing that, I might take a smaller brush. This is still quite a big brush. And at this point, I might start going, you know what, I want quite thick paint. And then I can come in and I could do really dark specific lines like this. So dark lines. And there we're just doing some of that thick stuff that I've been saying, oh, we really should avoid, but only some of it. So now look, we can really amp up the contrast in just a few places, but not everywhere. So that's option 2, which is also a perfectly viable good option. Option 3 is we start playing a bit more with some mixed media. And I'm going to do that today just because I think it's something we all want to do. I think it's something many of us have hanging around and we don't do enough of, exploring textures, especially for simple things, for sketching. So let's just take 3 coloured watercolour pencils. These are Winsor Newton watercolour pencils. And these are great to use when the page is still wet. And we can just apply some simple marks. These are so subtle, it may even be, let's do a darker one you can see properly on the camera. So I'm going to move to my carmine. And again, this is just the idea of using things that you have around when we are doing simple projects, having fun. It's about getting to know what we like, getting to know our supplies and things. And these guys, I probably don't use enough. Or maybe I do use them enough, but I still don't use them as much as my colours. So it's nice to have a play and understand how they work and see the kind of textures that we can bring out. And there we go. I don't want to overdo it either, so I'm just doing some really sort of simple hatching, as you can see. Simple marks. Let's see what happens if we block in a little area. Maybe that can help. We added that like specific shadow. Maybe this can do a bit of specific shadow as well. Let's do just a couple of extra marks. Maybe even just some little lines. These lines are kind of connecting. They're all going horizontally across. They're connecting the apples to the, the surrounding world. If I'm honest, I think that's probably enough. Last thing I'm going to do is a bit of silliness. So I've got this lovely colour here, which I always forget if it's sugilite or sodalite. Sodalite's dark or not, and sugilite's dark or not. And the other one is this, which is a shimmering colour. It's one of the Primatech colours by Daniel Smith. It's got a sort of lovely, slightly neutral silvery feel, and when you add it into watercolour, when it's dry you get this kind of pleasant reflectivity from it. Not sure how else to describe that in a more sciencey way, but there you go. And that is my simple art project done. And in that we've talked about how to avoid overworking your colours, and I hope it's been a little bit useful. Do like, subscribe, leave a comment, ask me your questions down below, and turn on the notification bell. I always forget to say that. With that, video's over, but if you want to join any of my courses, check out the links below.